Tonight, people are leaving eastern Aleppo and they have something to tell, a story that the rest of the world did not see, and that includes the UN. What can the world do now to help Syrians after Aleppo? I'm Brent Goff, and this is The Day. The sound of Aleppo's ceasefire, a convoy of ambulances and buses finally evacuating civilians out of the Syrian city. Emergency medics rushing to prevent more senseless dying, while Syria's president rushes to declare a rebirth of power.
Aleppo is Aleppo's citizens with their resistance, the Syrian army's courage, and every Syrian citizen who stood by Aleppo and the whole country. They are all history. This is history in the making.
So, is this now after Aleppo? What kind of world awaits the thousands of war-weary Syrian souls? Also on the show.
Yahoo just announced that 1 billion user accounts were hacked. Keep in mind that there's only 3.5 billion internet users. And so billion accounts were hacked. This is it's a staggering number.
The mother of all hacks. Change your password. What about changing your war game too?
I know that Yahoo is suggesting that this is a state-sponsored exercise, possibly Russia. I'm inclined to discount it because I really don't know what benefit Russia or anybody else would get from 1 billion accounts of very, very ordinary people.
Welcome to the program, everyone. We begin the day that finally moved from inside to outside Aleppo. After a nerve-wrenching start and stop and start again ceasefire in the eastern part of the city, the skies are now clear of shelling and airstrikes, allowing civilians to evacuate the ruins of their homes and their lives. Now, it remains unclear tonight how many people were inside rebel-held areas and how many are evacuating. What is clear, the deal is the biggest victory for President Bashar al-Assad since this war began. He even compared the recapturing of the city today to the birth of Jesus Christ.
History and time are related to each other, but people do not remember time, they remember history. Time converts into history when important events in the world convert time into history. We talk about before Christ and after Christ. I think after liberating Aleppo, we will say not only that the Syrian situation, but also the regional and international situation is different before liberating Aleppo and after it.
Before, after Aleppo. Well, history will certainly record the impotence of the international community to prevent the breakdown of humanity that Assad will use to build up his power. What can the United Nations offer now after Aleppo? I'll pose that very question to Human Rights Watch in just a moment. But first, the images and sounds from the ground, from a people now on the move.
Deliverance, finally, from eastern Aleppo, or so they hope. This convoy of buses and ambulances are at last on the move on the way out of rebel-held areas. Earlier, people from the shattered rebel-held neighbourhoods at last boarded the buses. This follows over 24 hours of delays and recrimination. Relief won't come until all the buses finally depart for safety. The evacuation deal collapsed yesterday amid fresh fighting. Everyone is on tenterhooks. A medical convoy about to leave eastern Aleppo had to turn back earlier when pro-Syrian government fighters opened fire on it. The Syrian government claims it is fulfilling its part of the evacuation deal. As long as a withdrawal plan in any name or form can help protect civilians and Aleppo, we will surely support it. It's not the first time we implement such a plan of protecting civilians and ending the armed conflict. The regime said at least 4,000 rebels and their families will be evacuated from the last opposition-held districts. But some reports say that as many as 50,000 people remain trapped in eastern Aleppo. It's unclear how many are prepared to leave now.
So many things remain unclear about Aleppo. Let's try to get some answers. I'm joined now by Philippe Bellopion with Human Rights Watch. He joins me from New York. Good evening to you, Philippe. Let me begin by getting your reaction to the narrative that was given today by President Bashar al-Assad.
Well, look, I mean, hearing his victorious words is, nothing but shocking. I think he's right. It's a historical moment, but not for the reasons he describes. It's a historical moment because of the brutality of this conflict, which has probably been the worst in a generation. And he's very right that history will remember Aleppo, but hopefully it will remember once people responsible for the attacks on civilians are judged and are facing a tribunal, a court of law, because that's where they belong.
Aleppo has been a showplace of the UN Security Council's inability to overcome power politics for the greater good of humanity. Is there anything that the UN can now do to help Syrians?
Absolutely. I mean, first, you are right. This is a huge stain on the record of the UN Security Council and on our collective conscience. But when we blame the Security Council, we have to look a little bit deeper. Who is to blame for the failure of the Security Council to act? It's not the Council as a whole, really, to be fair. It's the countries that have abused their veto power to block action for more than 5 years now. And these two countries are Russia and China. They have repeatedly blocked even the most innocuous attempts to condemn the violations in Syria and to address them. They have blocked efforts to refer the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court. And Moscow in particular has shamelessly used its veto power, which should be seen as a great privilege, to simply protect its interest and its ally in Syria. So that's where the blame squarely lays. The question of what the UN could do now. Mm-hmm. In our view, since the Security Council is deadlocked, we need to take this to the UN General Assembly. All it would take is for 9 votes out of the 15 members of the Security Council to make the call. Russia cannot block that with its veto, and then the issue could be sent to the UN General Assembly where no one has any veto.
And what happens then, Philippe? Let's say you get that special session in the General Assembly of the United Nations. What can the General Assembly do in tangible terms for the people leaving Aleppo?
Look, it's a very fair question, and I understand why Syrians or people who are observing the UN these days would feel a bit skeptical that a meeting at the UN General Assembly would somehow solve the crisis. And they would be right. It's not a magic bullet by any stretch of the imagination, but it's something that the international community can do to address the situation in Syria. They can decide to meet and together, condemn the violations committed by the Syrian government and its Russian ally. They could ask and demand that the authorities allow UN monitors or independent observers to go to Aleppo and other besieged areas to see what's happening. They also have the power to create a prosecutor-like mechanism, appoint someone who would be able to start getting files ready and prepare, criminal evidence for the day when people responsible for the crimes in Syria have to face justice. So it will not solve the conflict magically, but it's certainly something that the General Assembly can do instead of, just being a bystander.
Yeah, just standing there and letting things happen, which has been the case now for, it seems, years. Let me ask you, Philippe, about the black and white feeling of reporting about the situation in Aleppo. There are a lot of critics who say that the reporting has been, particularly by Western media, that we've been reporting about Syria's forces backed by Russia, maybe also by Iran, as being the evil forces, if you will, and the rebels in eastern Aleppo being the victims, almost being the good guys. We know it can't be that simple. Can we know the truth? And if we did, would that have an impact on what the UN would do?
Look, I cannot vouch for the press coverage, but I can tell you that Human Rights Watch, as an independent human rights organization, has not held its punches against anyone committing crimes in Syria. And you are very right. It is not black and white, far from that. There is no question that some opposition groups have committed atrocious crimes in Syria, and some rebel groups in East Aleppo have in fact bombarded civilians in Western Aleppo, which is also a war crime. So there is no question that there is plenty of blame to go around. Now, let me make one point very clear. The fact that one side commits abuses is no excuse for the other one to do the same. Everybody is held by the same laws of war. We are not, commenting on people choosing to take up arms against the government or to try to quash the rebellions. But even in war, there are rules, there are laws that are enshrined in the Geneva Conventions, and these have been time and time again violated in Syria by both sides. But we have to be clear: the government and Russia are responsible for the overwhelming majority of abuses that have been committed in recent times. And they have used their air power in particular, which the rebels do not have, to bomb civilians that are besieged and have no access to food or medicine.
What about the role of Human Rights Watch, Philippe? We know that it's been hard for anyone to actually get inside Aleppo to get the truth about what's going on. What about for your organization now, after Aleppo? What do you anticipate in trying to get the story out about what's happening in Syria?
I mean, look, first, it's extremely challenging for us to report about human rights violations in the country. It's a very dangerous place. Access has been very difficult, but we'll keep on trying. What we are worried about now is that people, the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, are lulled into a false sense of security because now Eastern Aleppo is being evacuated. We are very concerned that this will not address the bigger picture here. Even if Eastern Aleppo is evacuated safely, and that's still a question mark, there are still many places that are besieged. People are starving in many of them. Some of the civilians fleeing Aleppo right now are going to go to Idlib, which might be the next Aleppo. It's not inconceivable that in a couple of weeks I'll be back here discussing now the situation in Idlib, because nothing was done about what happened in Aleppo.
And with that, we will have to wrap it up. Philippe Balopion with Human Rights Watch talking to us tonight from New York. Philippe, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.